600 human skulls cemented together in a tower of lime and stone. Men, women, children. Their eye sockets facing outward, arranged in concentric rings that widen as the tower rises. Each skull drilled through with holes where wooden poles once held them in place. The tower is 5 meters in diameter and at least 1.7 meters tall. It was built between 1486 and 1502, and it was found 3.5 meters below a Mexico City street next to the Metropolitan Cathedral by archaeologists who were restoring a colonial-era building and broke through the floor into something that had been sealed underneath for 500 years. The Spanish conquistadors who entered Tenochtitlan in 1519 described seeing this structure when it was still standing. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a soldier in Hernan Cortes's expedition, wrote that he saw a plaza filled with so many skulls placed on racks that he could not count them, though he estimated more than 100,000. Another conquistador, Andres de Tapia, was given the specific task of counting the skulls. He estimated 136,000 on the main rack alone. For centuries, historians dismissed these numbers as colonial propaganda, exaggerations designed to justify the conquest by portraying the Aztecs as savages. The numbers were too large. The descriptions were too extreme. Nobody believed them. Then, in 2015, archaeologists found the tower. And the conquistadors, it turned out, may not have been exaggerating at all. The structure is called the Huey Tzompantli, from the Nahuatl word meaning great skull rack. It was the largest of at least 7 skull racks that once stood in the sacred precinct of Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, in the area surrounding the Templo Mayor, the great double pyramid dedicated to the war god Huitzilopochtli and the rain god Tlaloc. The sacred precinct was the spiritual heart of the Aztec Empire, a walled compound containing more than 40 buildings, including temples, ball courts, shrines, and platforms for public ritual. The Huey Tzompantli stood at the center of this compound, visible to everyone who entered. The original structure was not a tower. It was a massive wooden scaffold, a palisade of 60 to 70 tall timber uprights linked by horizontal crossbeams, upon which freshly severed human heads were threaded through holes drilled in the temples. The heads were placed on the rack while the flesh was still intact. Over time, as the flesh decayed and the skulls were exposed, they were removed from the wooden rack, coated in lime mortar, and incorporated into 2 circular towers that flanked the main scaffold. These towers were permanent structures built to last, each skull cemented into place, facing outward in rising concentric rings, creating a cylindrical wall of bone visible from every direction. The tower that archaeologists have been excavating since 2015 is one of these 2 flanking structures. Only a portion of it has been uncovered because the rest extends beneath the foundations of several historic buildings, including the Metropolitan Cathedral itself, the same cathedral that was built using stones taken from the Templo Mayor after the Spanish demolished it in 1521. The excavation has been painstaking. The dig site sits 3.5 meters below the modern street level, in a space so confined that archaeologists sometimes work lying on their stomachs, brushing soil from individual skulls with dental tools. The historical buildings above are structurally fragile. Any vibration, any shift in the underlying soil, any miscalculation could damage the colonial architecture overhead while the team uncovers the Aztec architecture below. 2 worlds, one on top of the other, separated by a few meters of compacted rubble and 5 centuries of silence. As of the most recent excavation phase, over 600 skulls have been identified in the tower. Among them are at least 3 children, identified by the size of their crania and by the development of their teeth. The presence of women and children was the discovery that shocked the archaeological community more than anything else. For decades, the standard assumption had been that Tzompantli contained only the skulls of male warriors, captured in battle and sacrificed at the Templo Mayor. The skull rack was understood as a military trophy display, a warning to enemies and a celebration of Aztec martial power. The presence of women and children overturned that assumption entirely. One of the lead biological anthropologists on the project put it simply. She said they were expecting just men, obviously young men, as warriors would be, and the thing about the women and children is that you would think they would not be going to war. Something is happening that we have no record of, and this is really new. To understand what the Huey Tzompantli meant to the people who built it, the modern instinct to see it as an instrument of terror has to be set aside, at least temporarily. The Aztecs did not view human sacrifice the way the Spanish did. The Spanish saw it as demonic. The Aztecs saw it as the mechanism that kept the universe alive. In Aztec cosmology, the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world. The sun itself was sustained by human blood. Without regular offerings of life, the sun would stop moving, the rains would cease, the crops would fail, and the world would end. The Tzompantli was not a monument to death. It was, in the words of INAH, a building of life rather than death. Every skull on the rack represented an offering that had kept the cosmos in motion for one more day. The victims were brought to the top of the Templo Mayor, held down on a stone slab by 2 or more priests, and a third priest cut open the chest with an obsidian blade and removed the still beating heart. The heart was held toward the sun. The body was kicked down the steep steps of the pyramid. At the base, the head was severed and given to the warrior who had captured the victim in battle. The warrior kept the body, and the limbs were sometimes distributed for ceremonial consumption. The skull, once the flesh had been removed, was drilled through the temples and threaded onto a wooden pole, which was then slotted into the horizontal beams of the Tzompantli. The scale was enormous. Spanish accounts describe ceremonies in which hundreds or even thousands of captives were sacrificed over the course of several days. During the dedication of the expanded Templo Mayor in 1487, under the 8th Aztec ruler Ahuitzotl, accounts describe the sacrifice of as many as 20,000 prisoners of war, though modern historians have debated the figure and some consider it exaggerated. What is not disputed is that the Tzompantli was continuously replenished. Old skulls were removed from the wooden scaffold and cemented into the flanking towers, making room for new ones. The structure was alive in a functional sense, constantly growing, constantly renewed. Ahuitzotl was one of the most aggressive rulers in Aztec history. Under his command, the empire expanded to its greatest territorial extent, reaching into modern-day Guatemala and the Gulf Coast. He built the Great Temple of Malinalco, constructed a new aqueduct for the capital, and instituted a bureaucracy capable of administering an empire of several million people. The 3 construction phases of the Huey Tzompantli that archaeologists have identified all date to his reign, between 1486 and 1502. The tower was his project, built at the peak of Aztec power, when the supply of captive warriors from the empire's ongoing campaigns, the so-called Flower Wars, was at its highest. The Flower Wars were a unique institution. They were not wars of conquest. They were prearranged battles between the Aztecs and their neighbors, particularly the Tlaxcalans, fought specifically to capture prisoners for sacrifice. The wars had formal rules, agreed-upon locations, and a mutual understanding that the purpose was not to destroy the enemy, but to take them alive. Both sides needed the captives. Both sides participated willingly, at least at the institutional level. Individual warriors on both sides understood that capture meant death on the sacrificial stone, and fought accordingly. The warriors who excelled at capturing prisoners rose through the ranks of Aztec society. Their status, their clothing, their privileges, and their proximity to the emperor were determined by how many captives they had taken. A warrior who captured 1 prisoner could wear a special cloak. 2 prisoners earned face paint and a different hairstyle. 3 prisoners granted entry into an elite military order. 4 prisoners or more earned the right to wear the jaguar or eagle costume, the most prestigious rank in the Aztec military. The entire social structure of the warrior class, from clothing to housing to marriage rights, was organized around the production of sacrificial victims. The dedication ceremony for the expanded Templo Mayor in 1487 was the most extreme expression of this system. A Huey Tzompantli had rebuilt the pyramid to a height of approximately 60 meters, the tallest structure in the city, visible from every corner of the valley. To consecrate it, he ordered a sacrifice of captives on a scale that had never been attempted before. Prisoners were lined up in 4 rows, stretching down the causeways that led to the temple. 4 teams of priests worked simultaneously at 4 sacrificial stones arranged at the summit. The killing began at dawn and continued for 4 days. The exact number of victims is disputed. The Aztec codices claim 80,400 victims over 4 days. Most modern historians consider this figure exaggerated and estimate the true number at between 4,000 and 20,000. Even the lower estimate represents a staggering volume of organized killing, carried out in public, witnessed by the entire population of the capital, and by delegations from allied and enemy states who had been invited specifically to watch. The message was clear. This is what the empire can do. This is what the gods require. And the skulls of the dead were added to the Tzompantli. And every one of those victims ended up on the Tzompantli. When Cortes and his men entered the sacred precinct in November 1519, the Tzompantli was standing at its full height, loaded with tens of thousands of skulls. Bernal Diaz described the site with a mixture of awe and horror. He wrote that he saw places filled with dead skulls that could be counted, that they were arranged so well and so neatly in piles that he could only marvel at the sight. This was not a man prone to exaggeration. Diaz was a career soldier who had participated in multiple expeditions before Cortes. His account was written decades after the events, but its physical details have been consistently confirmed by archaeological evidence. Diaz also described the temples themselves. At the top of the Templo Mayor, he saw the sacrificial stones stained with dried blood, the walls of the inner chamber blackened with it, and the stench so overpowering that several of the conquistadors had to leave. He described seeing the hearts of recently sacrificed victims burning in braziers before stone idols, and he described the Tzompantli as something beyond his ability to fully communicate, a structure so large and so densely packed with human remains that the sight of it exceeded the capacity of language. What Diaz could not have known was that the Tzompantli he saw was only the most recent iteration. The structure had been rebuilt and expanded multiple times over the previous decades. Each new ruler added to it. Each new military campaign supplied fresh skulls. The tower he saw in 1519 was the cumulative product of at least 30 years of continuous expansion under 3 successive rulers. After the Spanish retreated from Tenochtitlan during the Noche Triste in June 1520, losing over 1,000 men and several horses to Aztec counterattacks, the Aztecs displayed the severed heads of captured Spaniards and of their horses on a makeshift Tzompantli, erected specifically to taunt the retreating army. This detail, recorded in both Spanish accounts and Aztec codices, shows that the practice was not confined to the sacred precinct. It was deployed as battlefield psychological warfare. Cortes returned with reinforcements a year later. After the siege of Tenochtitlan ended on August 13, 1521, the Spanish systematically demolished the Templo Mayor and the surrounding structures, including the skull racks. The wooden scaffolds were torn down, the skulls were scattered and deliberately crushed. The stone platforms were broken apart and repurposed as building material for the new colonial city. The Metropolitan Cathedral was built directly over the ruins of the Templo Mayor. The Zocalo, the central plaza of Mexico City, was paved over the sacred precinct. The conquistadors destroyed the surface structure, but they did not dig deep enough to reach the flanking towers, which were already partially buried in their own accumulated debris. For 500 years, the Huey Tzompantli lay beneath the city, buried under colonial rubble, forgotten by history, dismissed as a myth by scholars who could not believe the Spanish accounts. In 2015, archaeologists working in the basement of a building near the cathedral broke through a layer of colonial-era fill and found the first skulls. By 2017, the tower's cylindrical structure was clearly defined. By 2020, over 600 skulls had been documented. The excavation continues. The tower extends further than the current dig site can reach. More skulls are waiting beneath the foundations of buildings that cannot be moved. The lead archaeologist on the Templo Mayor project described the situation in terms that echo every other video on this channel. It is like a puzzle we are trying to put together. Every time they dig in the historic center of Mexico City, they find another piece. The Coyosalcuay stone in 1978. The Templo Mayor excavation from 1978 to 1982. The Skull Tower in 2015. Every road repair, every utility installation, every building renovation in the historic center risks breaking through into the Aztec layer that sits less than 4 meters below the modern street. The Mexican government now operates a permanent urban archaeology program with first rights to excavation at any construction or renovation site in the historic center. It is the only program of its kind in the world. A standing archaeological team embedded into the municipal infrastructure of a modern capital city, permanently on call for the next accidental discovery. The conquistadors described what they saw. The historians called them liars. The archaeologists found the proof. 600 skulls and counting, cemented together in a tower that was built to keep the sun alive, buried beneath a cathedral that was built to replace the civilization that made it, waiting 3.5 meters below a street where 2 million people walk every day without knowing what is underneath them. The tower is still being excavated, the cathedral is still standing above it, and somewhere beneath the foundations that cannot be moved, the rest of the skulls are still facing outward, staring through the dark at a world that forgot they were there. Thanks for watching. If this is the kind of exploration you want to follow, subscribe. There is more to come.